Welcome to Module 2 on Speaking Up for Human Rights. Let's hear what the most rewarding experiences have been when speaking up for human rights for Maria Munir, Guadalupe Marego, and Salil Shetty.
For me, the reward isn't in the awards I get nominated for or the prestigious events I get asked to speak at. Those are all honours, I think. But a rewarding experience is definitely when I came out to Obama and challenged him on transgender inclusivity. My university supervisor emailed me afterwards. She's Canadian, and she said that her family friend in Canada had seen me on TV and said, "Oh, Nicole, isn't that your student?" And Nicole turned and said, "Yes, it is." And they had a massive family conversation that hadn't really been had before about, gender, and especially for the child in question who was questioning their gender. That was really empowering for them because they were able to point on the TV and say, well, that person explained what I'm trying to say. See, they did it to a world leader, so maybe I can do it to my own family. And for me, that's rewarding because I want people to feel like they don't have to look at TV to see someone who isn't relatable. They feel like they can draw on that experience themselves.
It is also related to those people that inspire me, seeing justice happening. And again, for example, when I think of the relatives of people in Peru in the 90s, that there were lots of disappearances at the time in Peru, and I met many of the relatives of those disappeared. And when they found out the truth about their loved ones, and when those who had committed those atrocities were actually put in the dock, found guilty, and punished for that crime, and they then felt that they had received justice, that, those have been really the most rewarding moments for me.
I think probably one of the best sort of moments was in Ethiopia, and so we had two. Ethiopian government has been, arresting the entire political opposition, has been arresting civil society, harassing them for almost 10-15 years now. So it's not a new story. But at a point in time, when I got involved, we had a situation where several key civil society leaders were arrested, and we had to negotiate their release with the regime there, and I was very involved, heavily involved with that process. And in the end, they did release some key activists. And as it turns out, the two people who I was directly involved in, it wasn't just me. There were many, many forces at work. So I don't want to take, singular credit for this. But the interesting thing is that these two people who were then released through that process today are the heads of the regional work for Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International. It was really a very, very difficult process, because you can imagine the families of these individuals and the activists in the country were feeling very, very down. And I think the release of these people gave a huge amount of inspiration and courage to the rest of the community.
Let's now consider 3 case studies and the rights concerned with each of them, to find out about what's the impact when human rights are guaranteed. The first case study is that of a young girl living 10 kilometers from the closest well, who has to walk there every day to fetch water for herself and her family. This takes half a day and only provides her 6-person family with 15 liters of water. This is barely enough for drinking, cooking, and doing a little bit of washing. Furthermore, the way to the well is dangerous, as armed militia as well as wild animals are hiding in the woods. Can you tell which right is concerned in this case study? The right to water, the right to non-discrimination, the right to privacy, or the right of freedom of expression? Think about it for 10 seconds. The main right concerned is the right to an adequate standard of living, such as the right to water. When the right is guaranteed, the state makes sure a well is dug near to the village or provides a water pipe. The girl has much more time for other things now, such as going to school. The second case study is that of a female journalist who is being imprisoned for writing an article which is critical of the government. She is detained in miserable conditions and suffers from deteriorating health without access to medical care, despite suffering from diabetes. The family of the journalist loses the only income they have. Therefore, they lose their home and their children have to work instead of going to school. Can you tell which right is concerned in this case study? The right to water, the right to non-discrimination, the right to privacy, or the right of freedom of expression? Think about it for 10 seconds. The main right concerned is the freedom of expression. When the right is guaranteed, the journalist is released from prison and can continue writing articles about anything she wants. The family can stay in their home. The children can go to school. The third case study is that of a teacher who has been working in a public school for several years. One day, the principal finds out that he is gay. After a set of humiliating and intrusive interviews about his personal life, the teacher is dismissed. Can you tell which two rights are concerned in this case study amongst the right to water, the right to non-discrimination, the right to privacy, or the right of freedom of expression? Think about it for 10 seconds. The main rights concerned are the right to privacy and right to non-discrimination. When the teacher complains about the violation of his rights before a national court, the court finds a violation of the right to privacy and non-discrimination. When the right is realized, the teacher can continue with his occupation, regardless of his sexual orientation and without living in fear for being who he is. What is your role and the role of other key actors in human rights? There are a variety of actors whose role is essential to guarantee human rights. The states have a particular obligation to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights, and other key actors are international organizations, non-governmental organizations, and last but not least, you. Let's see in detail the role of states, international organizations, non-governmental organizations, and your role. It is primarily the states and their organs, for example, courts, lawmakers, police, public officials who have to guarantee human rights for all people on their territory. Legally, states are obligated to follow the national and international human rights standards they have accepted. It is the state's obligation to respect, protect, and fulfill. First, states have to respect human rights, which means they should not unduly interfere. An example would be the obligation of the state to refrain from torturing an individual, respecting the prohibition of torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. Second, states have to protect human rights, which means they should take necessary measures to prevent or redress their abuses by private actors. For example, the state has the obligation to intervene if the physical integrity of one person is threatened by another private person. This could, for example, be a police officer actively intervening and protecting the right to physical integrity of the person attacked. Third, states have to fulfill human rights, which means they should implement general and structural measures that are needed to realize them. For example, the duty to establish a human rights compliant court system that is able to guarantee the right to a fair trial, the duty to adopt laws criminalizing theft, protecting the rights of property against abuse by private persons, or to establish an educational system that allows for the realization of the right to education. But what does the state's obligations to respect, protect, and fulfill actually mean in practical terms? The following scenario allows you to explore what the state's obligations to respect, protect, and fulfill actually mean regarding the right to food. Let's consider the example of a farmer and their family living in a remote area far from the next city. For many years, they have grown their own crops and lived from their own production. They use the lake next to their farm to water their crops, to feed their livestock, and to cook and clean their clothes. The first scenario is that of a company building an industrial plant close to a farm, next to the lake. They release dangerous chemicals into the water, which causes the crops to die and the livestock of the farmers to get sick. Which state obligation is most relevant here to see the difference it makes when the state is guaranteeing the right to food? Respect, protect, or fulfill? Think about it for 10 seconds. The state has the obligation to protect the farmer against the chemical waste of the industrial plant to ensure that their livelihoods and their food sources are not destroyed. This could mean that the state would need to adopt and implement laws that prohibit companies from dumping dangerous waste. It should also allow for the farmer to seek compensation from the company in the event that such waste is released into the environment and harms livestock and crops. Now, let's think about another situation. It was a dry summer, and the farm, as well as all other farms in this region, could not produce enough food for living. The farmer desperately needs to buy food items, but due to a lack of infrastructure between different regions, there is no food available for hundreds of kilometers. Even though farmers in other regions of the country had a good summer and plenty of produce. Which state obligation is most relevant here? Respect, protect, or fulfill? Think about it for 10 seconds. The state has the obligation to fulfill the right to food. It has the obligation to create the necessary infrastructure that allows the farmer to have access to sufficient and adequate food. In extreme cases, the state also has the obligation to provide food directly to the farmer. Let's consider a third situation. The government discovers oil close to the farm. It decides to take possession of the farm in order to be able to exploit the oil fields, without paying any compensation. This robs the farmer and their family from all sources of food and income. Which state obligation is most relevant here? Respect, protect, or fulfill? Think about it for 10 seconds. The state has the obligation to respect the right to food of the farmer and their family, as well as the right to property in this scenario, and cannot interfere in a way that destroys the livelihood of the farmer and their family. You have now discovered that it is the state who is the main actor and duty bearer when it comes to the realization of human rights. However, whether a right in reality will be guaranteed often depends on pressure from the international community, such as international organizations like the United Nations, and on the work of NGOs, that is, non-governmental organizations, and individual activists or human rights defenders. While states are the first guarantors of human rights, they are also the ones who frequently violate them. Therefore, international and regional protection mechanisms, that is, international courts or monitoring bodies, are considered essential to hold states accountable for the fulfillment of human rights obligations they have accepted. International organizations have a number of tools at their disposal to promote and enforce the implementation of internationally guaranteed human rights standards. These are monitoring and inquiring human right-related situations, collecting complaints by victims, fostering discussions on human rights and education. The first tool is monitoring, which aims to reinforce the state's responsibility to guarantee human rights, preventing their violations in the first place. States, as well as civil society, report about human rights standards, and these reports form the basis for recommendations on how to improve their protection. The second tool is by conducting inquiries about situations of ongoing alleged human rights violations are being looked into, potentially helping to end the violations. The third tool is complaints lodged by victims of human rights violations, who can receive a remedy to the violation, such as release from detention, compensation, restitution of property. The fourth tool is fostering discussions on human rights. As international organizations also provide an arena for states and non-governmental organizations to discuss related issues and to negotiate new human rights standards. The fifth tool is fostering human rights education, which can be defined as any learning, education, training, or information efforts aimed at building a universal culture of human rights. From acquiring skills to apply them in a practical way in daily life, to developing values and reinforcing attitudes and behavior which uphold human rights, or even taking action to defend and promote them. Let's now consider the role of non-governmental organizations. NGOs are widely considered as the engines of human rights protection. They contribute to the development of the international human rights system by monitoring state activities, doing field work, and advocating for better human rights policies. They are seen as intermediaries between individuals, state authorities, and international organizations, acting as critical watchdogs and a mouthpiece for the voice of individuals and groups when it comes to the promotion of human rights. NGOs frequently monitor states' compliance with human rights standards and collect reliable information. They assist state authorities by identifying gaps in human rights protection so the state can change its laws, policies, and practices. They lobby for the development of new standards. They educate and equip people with the knowledge, skills, and attitude to claim and defend their human rights and those of others. They fight individual violations of human rights. They support victims of violations to claim their rights or provide them with psychological, medical, financial, or other support. They raise awareness and apply permanent pressure on state authorities to act according to their human rights obligations. In order to make sure that human rights are respected, protected, and fulfilled, we cannot always rely on state authorities alone. You, the rights holders, need to claim them for yourselves and for everyone. We all need to play a part in defending and promoting human rights, wherever they are threatened or violated. We have to speak up against injustice, against violence or discrimination. We have to point out if an action or inaction by state authorities is violating them. Otherwise, states can continue to violate their human rights obligations without being held accountable. Human rights are there for all of us, but they can only work if we use and claim them. We can all contribute to creating a world where all people have their rights respected and protected. Now, take pen and paper, or record yourself, to start a new activity where you can reflect on how you can act. Write your own manifesto. A manifesto is a powerful statement of belief and action. It can be a powerful reminder of your beliefs and what motivates you to stand up and campaign for human rights. Here are the core elements to include. Core value. What deeply held belief is motivating you? What human rights issue do you want to act on? What is the change you would like to see? the way forward. What will you do next? Listen to how speaking out for human rights can change lives through the stories which represent some significant achievements on individual cases that were made possible because people like you stood up for them.
Norway, John Jeanette Solstad Remo. In 2015, following an Amnesty International campaign, John Jeanette Solstad Remo, a transgender woman, was able to change her legal gender without compulsory medical treatment. I can't imagine that Parliament won't make this law now. And when the new law is in place, you will be able to choose your own legal gender, said John Jeanette Solstad Remo. In June 2016, Norway passed the new law that gives transgender people access to legal gender recognition.
Egypt, Mazen Mohamed Abdallah, freed from detention in February 2016. The 14-year-old boy had allegedly been tortured, including being raped by a security officer bent on extracting a confession. Amnesty was the first to break the story, sparking broad media coverage that embarrassed the Egyptian government and prompted them to free Mazen. There are no words that could be said to express my gratitude and thanks to Amnesty International for getting my son back to me, said Mazen's mother.
Indonesia, Falp Karma. Activist Falp Karma was finally free from prison in Indonesia in November 2015. He had been jailed for more than a decade after raising a Papuan independence flag at a political ceremony in 2004. Amnesty supporters have long campaigned for Falp's release, including 65,000 messages of support written from 80 countries during Amnesty's letter-writing marathon, Right for Rights, in 2011.
Nigeria, Moses Akatogba. On 28 May 2015, Moses Akatogba, a Nigerian death row inmate, was pardoned after nearly 10 years in jail. He had been tortured to confess to a crime he says he never committed. Over 800,000 activists have sent letters demanding justice. Amnesty International members and activists are my heroes. I want to assure them that this great effort they have shown to me will not be in vain. I promise to be a human rights activist to fight for others, said Moses.
El Salvador, Maria Teresa Rivera, freed in May 2016. The 33-year-old had been sentenced to 40 years in prison in 2011 after suffering a miscarriage and then being accused of having an abortion. Thousands of Amnesty activists around the world wrote letters on her behalf, urging El Salvador to release her and stop criminalizing abortion. I'm very grateful to every man and woman who has been following my case with lighted candle and who hoped that I would be free, she wrote later.
Let's now see some ways in which you can speak up for human rights. So far, you explored how they are connected to our everyday lives and how you can take action to promote human rights in your community. Now, you will explore how you can raise awareness on human rights on a larger scale. Here are some ways to employ your strengths and skills to promote human rights in your community. Being creative, inspiring others on social media, writing articles and letters, and organizing and facilitating public events. Expressing yourself artistically means that you can draw attention to a human rights issue through art or satire. Take it to the streets or other public places. Do guerrilla theater, spontaneous, surprise performances in unlikely public spaces, intended to raise awareness. Take part in a flash mob, reclaiming public space. Give a name or a slogan to your flash mob to get your message across. You can also use a symbol that all participants can hold up or act out at the same time to reinforce the visual impact of the performance. Make sure you record your flash mob to share it online with an even larger number of people and inspire others. Write a poem and use the power of language to stir emotions and to liberate ideas. Compose a song, paint a picture, or design a mural. There are many ways of artistic expression that can be used to advocate for human rights. You can also speak out on social media through, for instance, hashtag campaigns, which can be a powerful way to raise awareness for a human rights issue publicly. Choose a catchy, simple, and meaningful hashtag that encourages others to contribute to your campaign. Today, many politicians and influencers are active on social media. Challenging and engaging with them can be a great way to amplify voices and get them to act. If you are passionate about a particular human rights issue and regularly read about it, why not share your findings with others through a public Facebook page? You can also write a letter to the press, picking up on racist or intolerant attitudes or other human rights-related topics. Write an article for a local or national media outlet on a human rights issue that is close to your heart. Support people in raising their voices loud enough to be heard, and explore how you can support them in taking action, which might include children, elderly people, refugees, depending on the society you live in. By writing letters or articles for newspapers. Interview people from marginalized groups and write about their perspectives. Telling real stories can be an effective tool to help people empathize with others and recognize the importance of upholding human rights. To organize public events, you can initiate a photo exhibition in your community. For example, showing the impact of pollution on a neighborhood. This can open others' eyes and may help to start a movement to get the issue addressed. Initiate or organize demonstrations, flash mobs, protest marches, petitions, sit-ins, critical mass events that deal with human rights issues. These activities will raise awareness of an issue and might attract others to a cause. Joining forces makes you stronger. This also may get the media talking, shows those in power that people are watching, and helps to put pressure on decision makers. Make 10th December, which is International Human Rights Day, important in your community. Invite local human rights heroes and activists to speak. Establish a Human Rights Defenders Award for members of the community who contribute to the protection and promotion of human rights, and invite local politicians or state representatives to join the celebration. Congratulations! You have completed Module 2. Please continue to Module 3 to learn more about challenging and influencing systems.